cool. I'm sure whatever we do will be fine. Unless I say something horrible way through, and then you'll definitely want to publish it anyway.
Right, of course. Yeah, but no, I think Marilyn. Yeah, we're hoping to just use it for notes later and putting together some good articles for you. So I'm Dan. I do the main thing I do on the site, like Aaron said, is those sentences, and I'm a huge Shovel Knight fan going back to the later time of 2015, where I was like kind of trapped in Japan, more or less. And,
what?
Yeah, it was an interesting time. Aaron came to see me. There weren't, ironically, being in Japan, there weren't a lot of outlets due to me to play games. But Shovel Knight on the 3DS was one where I was able to sort of sink my time into, and it was just a great experience. And that was sort of my my first play experience, and I was just completely taken with it. And
that's awesome.
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, thank you. But the game itself really interested me just because of the origin of it, and what we were hoping to get out of this interview and sort of brought out is something that I brought up with, I can't remember the gentleman's name who I spoke to, but I had a great conversation with one of the display folks at PAX.
Was it Mike Herbster or
it
Alec?
Was. That's right. I remember the name now, yep. And he was just telling me that he was telling me about the way that the King's Knight DLC was constructed and how it was sort of broken apart into different chapters and that kind of thing, so that it was a little bit more accessible to people on the go. And that got me thinking about how receptive you guys as a team have been to the backers. And I know that the DLC packs were the result of stretch goals, but it really got me about how it seems to me, as a fan of the game and as a fan of all the DLC, that you guys really are sort of very open to whatever fan reactions you get. And so, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It just fascinates me because, there's a fair number of Kickstarter projects, both video game and otherwise, that aren't exactly successful. And you guys are like right at the top of successful stories.
A lot of it, there's you can't discount the luck and motion of what we've been able to get through. I mean, like very practically, we put our Kickstarter before big websites were like banning covering Kickstarters. Like it was still kind of a hot new thing. And so when IGN, like we got Colin Moriarty covered the Shovel campaign before like the moment it went live. And so like we had this like really fortunate connection because we actually like sought him out because he actually had written a bunch of game FAQs, like walkthroughs on game FAQs, and so we sought him out because we thought, well, if he's doing that, like maybe he actually likes this kind of game, and so he was like taking them, he loved it, and so he covered it, and that was like very fortunate. But I don't think you can do that anymore. Like after like a couple weeks after we finished our Kickstarter, I forget who it was. It was like either IGN or Kotaku. They were like, we are no longer, as a policy, going to be covering Kickstarters for the foreseeable future. And it was like, we made it right under
under the wire.
Door, Indiana Jones slid into the thing, grabbing her hat. And so it was like really fortunate that we were able to get through that.
Yeah.
And also, like YouTubers hadn't been hit up for Kickstarters a bunch, and so we had connections with Game Grumps and with two best friends from our previous job. Like two friends loved our previous game that we had worked on, and so like we contacted them again, and they were like on board for whatever. And so like we just had like these multiple things that was either luck or providence or however you want to see it, and it was sort of like the way was paved for a little bit. So yeah, I wouldn't discount that from the story at all. That's like a major contributing factor.
Although I would say that being a fan of Game Grumps, and particularly the two best friends, I think they're often sort of people kind of don't realize how much they know about games and how much they can sort of just pinpoint what's going to be a good thing. And I remember watching there was a video with the titular best friends, Matt, at I think it was E3 of 2015 maybe, where they just sat down to have like dinner with a couple of you guys.
Yeah, I remember that. That was fun.
And so that's how I was introduced. And
that's cool.
Well, at that point, I was so I've been such a long-term fan of them that when they say something's going to be good, I usually, like, my ears prick up. So
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's a little more than luck in that case, just because, I mean, the game speaks for itself, I think. But that's interesting. Now, you think you guys were kind of like under the wire coming in with the Kickstarter thing. Do you think it's because with other projects, people have sort of been soured on Kickstarter or crowdfunding in general?
Well, there's been a lot more projects, and their user base in Kickstarter has also increased, but I think there's not I don't know. I feel like in my own personal experience, I can remember a time when it wouldn't be a month without hearing about the cool next new Kickstarter campaign that's happening. It's like, oh, now Double Fine's doing another one. Cool. Let's like think about this. Or like, we were talking with the Mighty Number 9 guys before that was announced, and it was like really exciting to like help shape what their Kickstarter was, and they had a bunch of people talking about it, and it was still it was still like a cool and unique thing. And almost every month there was like, oh, I want to check this out. I want to see what this is about. Hey, a cool dungeon crawler I haven't like thought about in a while, that genre, but like this one looks really great. And like Darkest Dungeon was that. But like I don't know if people will stop talking about them or if they've become kind of dried up. I don't feel like there has been a big like Kickstarter campaign that I've been like really excited about. Even if I don't back it, like I'll look at those and like and think about those. But like the last one I backed, it wasn't a friend's, but I was wow, man. I guess I did back Overload. It's a Descent. You played play game called Descent.
Yeah.
On PC back in like the 90s. The same guys kind of made their own version of it that's being done in a modern engine, and it looks really great. So I got excited for that, but like I feel like Kickstarter maybe isn't at its prime. And it used to be that I feel like you could put a project on Kickstarter and it would get funded and it would just like make gangbusters. But I feel like people have kind of cooled on it, and it's not like the fortune makers that it used to be. It's still a great way to generate discussion and have a central point for really focused, essentially marketing. Right. And so we're still considering if we would use it in the future. But we're seeing it as such, as like marketing tool, as like a drumming up activity about something, as opposed to and generating feedback and discussion not only within the community but like with the community, rather than like pinning our hopes on funding our next project with Kickstarter. Sure. Because that's just I just don't think it's going to happen. Even if we put the Kickstarter is going to be like $2 million. Like what project makes $2 million? Like none, right? Right. Like, that's crazy. But that's where budgets realistically are when you're talking about like a 2-year project. So, Kickstarter is not like what it used to be for sure.
One of my questions actually was, I was interested in moving forward with new projects. Would you consider doing crowdfunding? I guess it sounds like sort of to the extent that it would be an interesting sort of marketing campaign. Like, we're bringing the community together again, like we did with Shovel Knight. This is sort of a group endeavor kind of thing. Would you? Yeah, I think you wouldn't solely focus on it. It sounds like.
No, and I think that like secretly Kickstarters have always just been that. Like, except for the I don't know. I can't speak to all Kickstarters, but like video game Kickstarters especially. The idea that you could finish a scale with 5 people for $75,000 is like laughable. Right. That's sure. Such a tiny amount of money. We kind of broke down a little bit about this when we talked about the Plague Knight, when we released an article that talked about the budget and stuff, and basically a common napkin math kind of back of the hand kind of thing is a 10K man month per person. So you think each person is going to cost the company about $10,000 to maintain for 1 month. And you just do the math. You have 5 people. A project is going to take 8 months. So that's 5 people working 8 months. That's 40 times 10,000. That's already a 400,000. And 8 months is tiny.
Yeah.
That's like a short amount of time. Games aren't made in that time. That's like Shovel Knight was made, for perspective, by 5 people in 16 months. But like the majority of those months were crazy overtime, especially the last few months, which were full time. We're talking like 16-hour days for 7 days a week. And so the idea that you could do a game for anything less than $1 million, a very small 5-person studio, is sort of almost laughable.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable, that's for sure.
Do you think it's worth it to do you think it's worth it then to sort of be kind of transparent with people? And that sounds sort of needless, to sort of say like, hey, listen, guys, this is the reality of what it takes to make a game, and we appreciate your support, but it's gonna be a while. It's gonna take money to be kind of a huge.
I think
here.
Being open, being very open with that is very valuable, because it helps open people's eyes. Like when we initially asked for $75,000, and but we knew that was like some weird amount of money that we're just kind of like going to be able to coast on until the game really sort of use the game sales to pay ourselves back. Like the idea that it's we try to say this as much as we could. Like the money that you asked for going to be a sustainable full budget for what we're looking for. It's got to be part of the scheme. And so, if you haven't been around budgets and you haven't thought about video game budgets ever, when you hear about companies that get extra outside support from publishers, it kind of run away. But if you know, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like of course the publisher is going to match 90% of, or 90 to 10 of what the Kickstarters make, because like you can't. That's how you just need to like do. But yeah, all that to say is I think Kickstarter has always been sort of like, for the most part, a marketing tool, and that's why a lot of projects fail. Like a lot of projects that they rely so much on that money, when it runs out, they just like have no answer, and then they have nothing to do, and it's not their fault. Like this is not knowledge that you learn. Like no one goes to school for game design and learns about like a 10K man month, which is I think kind of crazy actually. But regardless, like you kind of learn your craft. Like you don't learn like the weird secrets of business, and it's easy to drum up excitement with good art and with cool ideas and the programming backbone to make that happen. And so like it's easy to like ask for money and get people excited, but that knowledge of how to budget things is sort of a weird arcane thing that not everybody has, and definitely the people backing a project don't have. And
sure.
So it's always this like big perspectives when a Kickstarter fails, and I don't know, I've never been like personally affected by it. I mean, like the biggest thing that was the the thing that I contributed to like didn't work out or was turned out to be a hoax or whatever. But
yeah,
the in general, it's like you see that kind of stuff. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That happens. Like they tried and they failed, but it's not like they swindled or like they're thieves. I don't know.
Yeah.
That kind of perspective is hard to wrap your head around. But I think if everybody's sort of learning that too,
I think the general idea of who back things without this greater knowledge of what's going on is that they do kind of feel like they were swindled or cheated. Where it really, from what you're saying, it just sort of sounds like, the people who were doing it got kind of overzealous and thought that maybe the Kickstarter would be able to fund the whole thing, and they didn't recognize that.
Or like there's always unforeseen things. Like
sure.
you ask for you get it, and then $500,000 lasts you for, like I said, 10K man month for 5 people. That's going to be like 1 month is $50,000 already. So that's 10 months. 10 months is not enough time to do pre-production and production and get it out the door, when like testing for a game can happen for 3 months. And then you work backwards, like, okay, well, if a game is being tested at its final thing, that's probably like beta happened before, like a month, and beta is sort of like everything works together and basically it's a done game. So you work backwards. Okay, what can we do like a month before that? Okay, we're already 4 months, like half of that time is like finished game that's being tested. Let's work another month behind that. That's like alpha. So that's like everything's basically strung together with missing holes. And so you have 3 months to alpha. So that means you have to do all of your content, and you forget about that month of like lead up time of like thinking about things and like just like drawing and like trying ideas out and prototyping. So then you have like 2 months. 2 months is actually, it's not 2 months because there's weekends. And so it's actually like 4 periods or 5 days and 4 periods of 5 days. And so you have 20 days or 40 days, and then you got to think about like, okay, well, there's like business days that happen, like you got to like talk about like all the other stuff that happens around it, and like when you plan marketing and who does trailers, and it's like, okay, so we're doing like a game for like a week and a half. Like it's not gonna work. But,
well, it's like, a hell of a game for a week and a half, I'll tell you that
much. And so like when you have $500,000, anybody who sees that's like, man, that is so much money. But if you've been doing games long enough, you're like, oh,
that's nothing.
That is such a tight budget.
Right. Oh man. Well, okay. So that then a couple of questions we have vis-a-vis like storytelling, like we were talking about, and how. I mean, if I were a Kickstarter backer, 500,000, and I knew that I contributed to that, 500 grand is a lot of money to me. So I would feel like I'm very much a part of the decision making and of the construction of everything. And how did you run into that a lot, where people were sort of vehemently considering themselves as part of the development team, or was that an issue you ran into?
But what we did was we created avenues for it. Mm-hmm. So at the $75 backer level, we ran Hangouts, and so we like Google Hangouts. So what we did was Google Hangouts couldn't actually handle that many users at the time. So I think what we did was use Twitch, and then we just had private chat in our we used Tip Chat at the time, so now we use Slack. It's like an internal messaging system that you can invite a bunch of extra guest users to. And so we just created a channel just for this time, and so we'd have 200 people in there, and we're talking about design and kind of exposing them to that, and they can like contribute, and people would give ideas and draw pictures. And so I think that if you wanted to be a part of that, like you saw that as your avenue to do it, and if you didn't have enough money but you want to be a part of it, you could like, oh man, I wish I had the $75 to do it. And that's like the barrier, as opposed to like feeling to be able to just like decide on things. But ultimately, like, we structured those to be kind of restrictive. Like we went to those meetings like where we wanted to take it, and we kind of led people like through our process, and it was more of us to like teach people how to like have those conversations, and it was very beneficial for us in those exercises, because we were able to like they say like teaching something is the best way to learn it. It's like the best way to like structure your learning for it. And us like talking about design and teaching it, we helped like get us through the process of like actually like thinking about these characters and giving us a little bit of like our internal deadlines and stuff. There was a lot of people that like wanted to contribute, and we had an avenue for it. And we also did listen though. Like we also have our Twitter's open, and I was responding to every comment on the Kickstarter page, and like with individual responses, and I don't know, it took a long time for a while. Our Kickstarter's page is basically done now, but for a while it was like 100 comments a day. Sure. It was like just too much. It felt like that much.
For doing that though, because I think that it speaks to sort of the integrity of the project, and I think a lot of people responded to that.
Overall, we just wanted people to feel like it was something that, while they did contribute the money to it, like they were seeing the results of their money very tangibly. I mean, we didn't want to feel like somebody was investing in us, because that's like a weird complication of terms, and we didn't want to feel like they were buying into decisions. But we also like we value feedback, and we want to have people give us feedback and know what we're talking about is done with like best wisdom forward. So like a lot for a while, as an example, I guess, is that we had the game that you couldn't level again. The idea was that this is a run-based game, so you're going to play it like with Mega Man. Like you play each level once, and then you go to a Wily Castle, and you finish those levels, and you're done. And so our idea was like, yeah, like you're not. Why would you? We don't want to feel like you have to backtrack and or that there's no grinding involved. Like the game has its progression. We want to respect that. And we were really adamant about that for a long time. But the feedback was just like overwhelming in the opposite. And so we started thinking about like, well, what does that actually mean? Like, let's actually have a conversation about it and talk about it. And so we ended up allowing players to go back and we made some concessions and still like you only get the bounty of beating the boss the first time but you still get to keep all the gold that you earned in the level. And it's like, well, the player's still like gaining gold by playing the game, but we still wanted to like encourage players to like move on to the next level. Anyway, so that's just like an example of us like wanting to make sure that like the community or the people that we had playing the game was heard and that we weren't just like, had our heads stuck up our own asses as we're making.
Yeah.
So it's transparency. It's a mix of like feedback. It's just like you can't sequester yourself off in the dark. You gotta have other people there.
Well, it sounds like something that I was kind of thinking about just reading about the entire Kickstarter campaign and the inevitable release of Shovel Knight and the various DLCs you've put out is that I kind of got the idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, that at some point you guys you had a vision for what the DLC specifically would look like, and then you would take people's feedback and sort of comments into account. You weren't going to be steamrolled by them. You were still the gatekeepers of Shovel Knight, and you had like an idea that, all right, well, that's an interesting concept that you're pitching to us. How would we go about implementing that? Is that what would happen most of the time, or was it different?
That happens on a daily basis.
Does it really?
Like it's not just like feedback from everybody outside the company. It's like internally. That's how we do the things.
Okay.
Do things too. So we have we don't have titles at the company. Everybody has like our technical titles are like we have roles that we fill. And we have one guy whose role is designer and director. And what that means, though, is that when he designs an object or he puts forth a design for what something should be for the gameplay, it's sort of a discussion point. And so we all like give feedback on it and talk about it and think about it and say whether the idea is good or not. And then he digests and processes that. And puts that into action and starts the asset pipeline. So in the same way, we wouldn't rely totally on player feedback because everyone's perspective is sort of like it when you break it down, sort of becomes a single voice, but that voice is also like isn't keeping in mind all the rest of the game.
Sure.
Like part of like Sean's job is to like head around like how this aspect and this level specifically works with what's happening on that screen, with also what's happening in the previous level and what's happening with the whole game and the narrative as a whole. And so you can't just ask a person who hasn't been thinking about Shovel Knight for the past 5 years in and out, like, well, what do you think if Tinker Knight had a rocket ability? That's like way too much pressure,
Right.
And it's also like it's too much for someone who's like not been in that, and so like you take suggestions with a grain of salt, but also like that's how he'll ask us, and we all say this, our feedback is this, and or someone says this and someone disagrees, and it's his job to make sure that the balance of all that is weighed against like the whole experience as a whole, and then we all sit down together and play it and find out that we were all wrong and actually the like the vision that we had for is trash and we just throw it out completely.
Sure.
So I don't know, it's a lot of like going like trying something out, seeing if it works, talking about it a lot, thinking about our feelings are on it, like tweaking it until it's like conceptually perfect, and implementing it and seeing how it actually plays out. So that means that everything we do takes a long ass time.
Sure, of course. Well, thinking about that then, something I had spoken to the gentleman at PAX about was the sort of I can't imagine it was a negative on the Plague Knight DLC, because I think I enjoyed it. I think it was fairly a fairly good response to it, but I know that between the Plague Knight DLC and Night DLC, there was a huge change in how those two things looked. So I'm wondering if, from what you just said about the sort of inner workings of Yacht Club and then the player feedback, how much of the change to make Specter Knight into sort of its own game was internal, and how much of it was based on what feedback you got?
Well, we definitely want it to be just like the Richter mode, like the same character but just like slightly different.
Right.
Like we wanted it to feel like it's his own unique character. And so to approach that, we started with the mobility and like the philosophy of his mobility. Whereas Shovel Knight, he's the down thrust is his core, and then you kind of build out from there. He has a melee attack, but like that's it. He's a jump, melee, down thrust, and everything else sort of like builds on top of that. Level design, abilities, secondary weapons, that kind of thing. But with Plague Knight, we wanted that to feel like it's a complex character that you're learning throughout the whole game. Like Shovel Knight, you learn in the first like 2 screens how to play as him. Like by the time you get to the first checkpoint in Shovel Knight, you know how to do everything you're going to have to do as that character. But with Plague Knight, it's like the opposite. Like in Plague Knight, you're learning how to play that character the entire game, and so he's wieldy for the whole time. Like, and you're bottling chaos, and like that sort of fits with his personality. He's like a crazy alchemist guy, and so it kind of works out that he's like he levels on his own terms, and you're kind of experiencing it like the flip side of the coin. A lot of times we're talking about Plague Knight being the Lion King 1.5. So it's like it's the same game but told from like this weird perspective.
Sure.
And, like the same events happen, but like really
yeah. It's Plague Knight and his assistants are the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of Shovel Knight. That's I think we all got that. Yeah.
So yeah, Plague Knight are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Love it.
The goal there was just like to add a twist on what was there already, and as a result, though, you kind of like the appeal of, I think, like as we're looking at it now, it's like Shovel Knight's appealing because like really easy to pick up and play. Plague Knight kind of goes against that a little bit, and that he's like kind of complicated and like, I don't know, like it's a double jump and a charge jump, and you can change the order of that, and that adds a lot of complications. And he is projectile based, so it's like a lot of complications. And it's like it's very simple things, but they're not just basic jump and shoot or jump and attack. And so as a result, we were like, man, Plague Knight is like just too hard. Like Plague Knight is too much. Let's make Specter Knight easy. It's effortless coolness. You can just like be a badass, run up a wall, hold down, and you like do a cool ass pose. Like you'll grind on rails because that's like hardcore and cool. And he does flips and slashes through things, and he's all about like momentum and doing cool things. And our goal was to make it easier than Plague Knight, and as a reaction to a lot of what our player was saying, or our player bases were saying. Yeah, it's like Plague Knight was too hard, or I didn't try it because like the first level is just like a kick in my ass. But I think the players that like really did get into it had a lot of good times. A friend of mine says, who doesn't play games, he's like, I played both, but I think Plague Knight is easier. And I love hearing that because it's like he's someone who like digested the mobility and like he got it. And so entry was definitely higher in Plague Knight, so we want to like eliminate all barriers of entry for Specter Knight. And as a result, King Knight is also sort of like in that same mindset and just like kind of get it really quickly and have avenues of players that don't necessarily want a complex experience, but like want something fulfilling and fun. Yeah. For them to have a good time with it too.
So, well, having played through the King's Knight demo at PAX, yeah, it very much feels like, oh, I could play this on the train, or I could play this.
Yeah.
This sort of.
Which level did you play? Did
I
you play
played
the
Pridemoor, yeah.
Oh,
and
man.
I was embarrassing myself for a while, but it is really one of those things where after you get sort of the idea of how he works,
Yeah.
you can get through it. And so it's interesting to hear.
We changed a lot of stuff
Yeah.
after that demo.
Oh, did you really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we walked away from PAX thinking, man, like there's like
Oh no! Oh, I got to play it now.
Yeah.
I feel
Well,
cool not having played it before this interview.
Yeah, no, like what you played and your experience, like having your rough tug avoid,
Oh,
and
okay.
so it's not like we're changing everything, but like we looked at that and there's just like there's little things that we can do to make things easier. We can add a little bit of delay as a player jumps at the apex of their jump. We can add a little bit of float so that they have more time to bash at the top of their apex. We can levels so that you don't feel like you're having to go backwards to go forward. You don't ever feel like you're having to figure out situational things. Like we wanted King Knight, like the that we made is like very much like after finishing Specter Knight's all about like setups. Like he runs up this wall and then jumps onto that wall, and then like there's a blank spot right here. If he times it just right, he can get to it. And there's like timing involved with all of his attacks. And so it's very setup heavy.
Yeah.
And so as a result, now we're making King Knight more low and like more just like action focused. And so like things can kind of happen and you don't have to feel like you're aiming at the right whole part of the wall. Like you're not like trying to exact thing that's sort of like the puzzle of the room. And so as a result, like that demo, we watched that like over and over at people failing in the exact same spots and like seeing seeing the same rooms over and over again because people weren't getting past these rooms, and like there was just like a lot of things that we walked away from that. Oh, yeah, we gotta change like this, and this, and we refocused on it, and it's a much more digestible experience. We also like removed like momentum from certain states, and so the player feels much more controlled and
What a cool thing though that you saw what was going on at the demo and took it as sort of like field research.
I mean that's one of the main reasons to go to PAX. That's like
is that right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Like you get people that are like, I guess their target demographic is like us because we just don't know how to like think outside of ourselves, and so like it's good to see like kids play it and think, oh yeah, like we can make it like this much easier in these areas, or like people that don't usually play games. We had people with their significant other there, and like they would come up and say, like, I don't play games at all, but like, my SO loves this, so like let me try it. And so like they would try it, and so for someone who hasn't played a 2D platformer, it's really hard to understand jump height. It's like reminders that like that's a thing to think about.
Right.
So it's really good to it's really good to have people play it. We had one of our level designers during the Specter Knight's development was sort of out of college and hadn't done a lot of projects on his own, and so when he took the game to Milan and showed it off there, he was seeing like majority was kids playing,
Sure.
Like kids under like 14 or 15 or less, and it was like eye-opening for him. And so like we got to see like the post Minecon version of these levels, and like they all become much more like what you see, whereas before they're like lots of puzzle setups, lots of like very intricate timing and stuff, and then it's like a little looser, and like the fun comes from doing the cool thing in us as opposed to like figuring out the steps A through G. So yeah, conventions are very valuable to us for sure.
Sounds like it. Absolutely.
Can I just ask, so in terms of the story of Shovel Knight, I'm really interested in terms of where it came from, since idea, or was it something that from the beginning you worked on as a team, and then how much did that really change or develop over the process of, talking to backers, what was going to happen in the DLCs, things like that?
So the story has always been a backburner to the gameplay, but it is a way for us to construct the experience. So like you have the story of Shovel Knight is like really it was started out just like really basic, just like we need to get the player here, like what's going to be the thing that drives him, and you kind of work at it from there. And really it's character focused. So like we're going to learn bits about the story from each of these characters. From learn that like that Shovel Knight is like justly dethroning an imposter king. In Specter Knight's stage, you learn a little bit about how the world works with death and how the Enchantress is keeping him alive, but also like, he's sitting in this world. In all the other levels, you kind of get a taste of like what the story is, but it's centered around that character, and we see it more as world building as opposed to a straight narrative. And so that's why there's never like like the opening sets it up. You have this build up, and then everything else kind of like bubbles up out of the ether, and it's not like this happened because this is happening because this plot point needs to happen because we need to go to the village to stop the king from whatever. Like we wanted the world sort of like organically there, and so the story comes from a set of character interactions, and as a result, it doesn't feel like it's necessary to the game experience, but it helps like structure the motivations of the player, and most importantly, it keeps the player in line with the main character's point of view. I think a lot of times that I feel like stories fail in video games is when I don't like doing the things that the character is doing. Like he's doing things that I'm kind of like watching. Yeah. So it bugs me a little bit about like the Witcher games where like, Geralt is this guy and he has his own personality and it's fine, and he's like sassy and he's got his own thing, but even when I'm choosing like what he's doing, I'm still influencing somebody else. I don't feel really super connected to that character. It's even worse in games like The Last of Us or Uncharted, where there's like, well, especially in The Last of Us, where it's like a serious tone and like things are dying, people are dying, and like they're living in this post-apocalyptic world, but I'm just like this dumbass like running around in circles and like pushing a giant dumpster around and like climbing on top. Like I feel like I don't feel like the character at all, and like it's like I don't know, and I like watching and experiencing characters, but when that influences the game too much, it just feels like this clusterfuck. Like what am I doing? Like what's happening? Like what's the point of this 20 minutes that I've just seen? Is it because I'm supposed to feel something? Because I'm not. I just like I failed that mission 10 times, and like my feeling is anger. But like, I don't know.
Well,
for us, story is about like the world more than it is the narrative, and like narrative points can happen in that structure, and tone can be expressed, and that's sort of how we approached each game. For Shovel Knight, it was about hope and pursuit, and because that's sort of how we felt the player should be feeling. And then with Plague Knight, it was about being a villain and kind of like being underhanded. That's why you kind of like get through the same levels in his own special way. He can break the rules and it's fine. He's like you go under the town and you see Shovel Knight up there because like you're the bad guy around. Expectations are flipped with characters because like there's more to this world than meets the eye. Like maybe there's more to a villain that could be there, because like it's the story of like the outcast kind of like finding their way. And so story was like important to us, and the world is most important. Sure. Specter Knight was going to be a tragedy from the beginning. Like we knew that we wanted him to be a bad guy, and like you walk away feeling bad for him, but also like he's a bad guy, he's a murderer, and like it's a tragedy. We wanted it to feel that way, and so he's like the true villain, and like there's death and like family devotion and stuff, and so there is a redemption moment because I don't know, like we always try to get it kind of depressing, but we kind of got to pull back.
Not to mention all the kids at Minecon.
What's that?
Not to mention all the kids at Minecon, right? You don't leave them with exactly. Life is dark and depressing kids.
Originally, we had it so that Shovel Knight, so he had these dreams where he's like trying to catch Shield Knight, and then the reveal was going to be that at the very end comes Shield Knight, and that he tries to catch her, but the original story point was that he catches her, but she's dead.
Oh no!
And then your final act is to put her in the ground and then use your shovel to and like we couldn't get to that point. We couldn't like narratively express that or like reconcile that with the game that we had already told.
That would have been the best, darkest thing.
We can't just kill her. That's like so harsh.
No, you could have killed her. What you can't do is bury her as the last act of the game.
But that's the best part.
That is the best part.
That's why he has a shovel. I don't know.
That's brilliant. Oh my god.
I mean, it played into a lot of the game about, but also like it doesn't reward the hope. It doesn't reward the player's experience. Right. So like what they've been going through. Like it doesn't create a like a whole. It just like it leads it to. It was like a slap in the face. And what we've been telling. Like if we had set it up like yeah, there's hope, but like reality happens anyways. Like if we had set it up that somehow, then we could have told that story. But that's just like not what we had done at that point. And so like by the time we got to that point, it was just like, man, you can't kill Shield Knight. She's the best.
Yeah, right. Well, on that note, so one of the things that I write about in the series that I have on the site is how I think games are so good at theming and how thematics are such a good tool to use for an interactive medium. And one of the things that, and please correct me if I'm being too undergrad essayist about it, but the one of the things that I really loved about playing through Shovel Knight, even the first time, was knowing that it was sort of this love letter to sort of nostalgic games in a way, while also being its own story and its own game. There is sort of this undercurrent and subtext of, especially when you get to the point where you do the boss rush and then you're talking to all the other knights, and they all kind of, it's all sort of as if been Shovel Knight. You could have been here too. This is all things that could have happened, things that we're looking back on sort of forlornly now. Was that a conscious decision of sort of to sort of factor into it, or was that just sort of an idea that you had for those characters as you had written them?
Oh yeah. No, there was no like, there's no underhanded like retrospective of nostalgia as itself, and there's no narrative of like you can't rely on the past too much because like what shapes your future is your actions. No, there's not too much of that. We wanted to battle with all the characters, and when you can choose to revive them and talk to them, there was no, and like what should their characters should say? Yeah, it wasn't like. Yeah, I guess if we had thought about it, there could have been some really high level meta narratives to talk and work through.
The reason I bring it up is because of your macabre burying Shield Knight story.
Yeah, no, that's
putting well, but no, I'm glad to know that's not the case, I guess. So. Well,
yeah, for the most part, it's pretty. Everything is sort of practical and serves the gameplay. We have. That said, we have a lot of story meetings. We talked about, each bullet point, and especially with Specter Knight, there was a lot of like discussion of the script and like, can we actually have him die? Like, originally we had it so that he would die and the Enchantress would revive him, but like that's kind of weird. Like, can we just have it so that he's like on death's door and she's maintaining his life? Can we keep the narrative the same? Do we have to explicitly show Luan dying? Like, does that have to happen? And it's like, well, yeah, kind of. So, there's a lot of like back and forth of like who these characters are. For a while, we didn't know who this other character would be. We didn't have Reese as like this, crux of the story as he later became. Right. It was sort of like this. Nebulous, he has to go in the past and sort of experience something with a friend that he eventually betrays. But like, who's his friend? Is he going to be like a mentor? Like, there's like some familial bond somewhere. And so like we just kind of like worked through all that and tried to like think about each thing as a group. A lot of like, there's a lot of meetings, a lot of like discussion. But yeah, ultimately that all has to serve the gameplay as well. And so originally. A lot of those cutscenes were just going to be like talking with just button prompts and also like visuals happening. But as it goes out, it was like, man, these should just be levels. Like the player should be experiencing this and working with Luan in a way that reinforce like and that they work together, because you do that as a player. And I think it's really, really important to all game stories, is that you align the player's motivations with the actions they're performing. And if there needs to be a disconnect there, then you need to be super intentional. I think that's why, everybody talks about that moment in Bio where the big like reveal happens, and it's like, that's impactful because it's like a thing that you've been doing as a player. Like,
right.
like you feel very connected to their point. And I think that's the highest impact, I think, when you tell stories in video games, is when the alignments of the motivations of the player and the character are the same.
Well, I can tell you that I think from a narrative thematic perspective, also tying into the gameplay, even something as simple as having your dreams with Shovel Knight, and then having the cathartic moment of actually, as the player in real time, catching her. It's like, oh, wonderful. We've
Well, so, it's like slow-mo, and it's like frustrating, and you're not sure what the result is, and it's just as like unsatisfying as a dream is, because it just ends.
Yeah. No, it's brilliant. Yeah, I can't laud you guys enough, that's for sure.
So. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Were those story beats something that you also consulted with the backers about, or was that just Howard's meetings and figure that out, give it to them?
Well, we talked about like the characters themselves with the backers and like what their personalities are, and like I said, like from the interactions of the characters of the players. So it's not. We didn't like specifically talk about plot points because we also didn't want to spoil things.
Sure.
But yeah, I guess like they did. I would say they definitely had an influence. But the biggest influence is us. Like we had, like I said, we had Hip Chat and we have Slack. We have little special emotes of those characters' heads, and we'll like put that out there and then speak in their voice, and like we kind of get a feel of like what their character is based on like being dorks with each other.
That's really
so that's sort of like where like their personalities kind of like flourish the most, and we have like a general understanding like Plague Knights is crazy and shy, and like King Knight is all self-aggrandizing, and Baz only talks in capital letters, and like like all these like characters like in our own brains, and so our headcanon sort of like shapes what the game narrative is. So yeah, there's. I mean,
no, you can say it.
It's like pretty masturbatory. Like it's just like us, just like
it's not what I was expecting.
Like it's like a big, just like us, our own in jokes become the thing that like we try to push, and
I think that's definitely the charm of it, though. I mean, having been a fan of, like I said, of Tube, seeing the Baz in your game was hilarious. That was
yeah, we love him, and like we adopt him, like we adopt his like personality into like our like our discussions and stuff. Like I said, like he only speaks in capital letters, but also he's like really into like being the Baz and like trying to prove himself and like failing, and Baz comes up a lot. Like the characters that have really obvious like big personalities are fun to pretend to be, and like or juxtapose Specter Knight, who's like really hardcore and cool, but like put him in situations that are like kind of silly. Like we wanted to figure out a way to like have him help an old lady across the street and like have him hold hands with her, like something that like is like really just like no, I'm too cool for that. If in a perfect world, like Specter Knight would smoke and like he's like really cool.
Yeah,
like
well,
he
what
doesn't
does
go
he
to
care?
school.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Made a lot of those jokes.
That's
but
great. It sounds like a fun writing process, or even just like texting your friends. Oh man. Well,
eventually it becomes a lot of just like haggling over words, and it becomes when you go through the script all together, it's like we'd all do it in a all focus day, and it's not as fun as it could be, but it's an act on the structure of us like learning these characters and knowing who they are for a long time. So
I mean, that's fantastic to hear, and it definitely shows in the writing of the game. So you sort of inadvertently answered a lot of the questions that I had.
Okay.
So I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know we've been talking for about an hour now, but
I appreciate
if you have any closing things, or Aaron, if you have any other questions that you'd like to bring up, I'm all set. It's been a pleasure. So you guys, I'll leave it to you guys.
Yeah, it's a good place for me to end it. Thank you so much again for your time, Nick. I mean, this has been such a great talk, and it's going to be very helpful. I'm really excited to make skills to share with you and everyone else.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I hope it all works out. I'm not too. I don't know. I tend to like rabbit trail a lot, so hopefully you get something that's like very focused on, and you can make some articles out of it.
Yeah.
And I hope I didn't shame myself.
No, I think you've hit the tone perfectly. So you're all set.
Good.
So very well. Yeah. Thank you again, Nick. It's been a real pleasure.